Okay, let's dive in. We're looking back at February 2nd, 1996, Frontier Middle School in Moses Lake, Washington.
Yeah, a day that started like any other Friday, really.
Until it didn't, a shooting right in the middle of an algebra class.
And the shooter was just a kid himself. 14 years old, Barry Loukaitis.
It's chilling. He killed his teacher, two classmates, and badly wounded another student.
It is. And today, we wanted to try and, peel back the layers. What leads a young person to that point? What were the hidden aspects?
Exactly. Because it's never just one thing, is it?
Rarely, if ever. It's usually a complex mix.
So let's set the scene. It's around 2 p.m., fifth period algebra. Loukaitis walks in.
And he's wearing this long black duster coat.
Which stood out, right? Not typical school wear.
No, not at all. And it later seemed significant, maybe tied to some of the media he was consuming, like those old westerns, perhaps.
We'll definitely get into that. But under the coat, that's where the real horror was.
Yeah. He had guns, his father's guns.
A .30-30 hunting rifle, a .357 Magnum, a .25 pistol, and ammo.
Serious weaponry. And the fact they belonged to his father raises immediate questions about, well, access. How did he get them? Secure storage.
Huge questions. And he didn't hesitate to use them.
No. The accounts say Manuel Vela Jr., Manny, was shot first, also 14.
There were reports Manny had bullied Loukaitis. That narrative came out early.
It did. Though, as we'll see, the prosecution kind of disputed that as the sole or even primary motive.
Then Arnold Fritz Jr., Arnie, also 14, was shot.
And another student, Natalie Hintz, just 13, she was hit too. Critically wounded, but thankfully survived.
And then the teacher, Leona Caires, 49 years old.
Tried to help, tried to intervene. A mother of 4.
And he shot her, killed her, just trying to protect her students.
Her bravery in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
It's almost unimaginable. A profound loss.
After that initial burst of violence, he didn't leave. He held the rest of the class hostage.
Right. Which suggests, maybe this wasn't just a spontaneous outburst. Holding hostages implies some level of planning or at least a shift in objective. Control, maybe?
The fear in that room must have been unbearable.
Absolutely. Just terror.
But then, amidst all that horror, something amazing happened. Jon Lane.
The gym teacher.
Yeah.
And coach.
He heard the shots. And he ran towards them, unarmed.
Incredible courage. Didn't hesitate. Just reacted to the danger to protect those kids.
He went right into that classroom. Loukaitis is there, armed, with terrified students.
And the story goes, Loukaitis actually mentioned wanting a hostage to escape.
And Lane? He volunteered himself, stepped up.
He did, offered himself in place of a student. That's just extraordinary selflessness.
But it didn't stop there. He saw a chance, right, a moment of distraction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Loukaitis looked away or something shifted, and Lane tackled him, disarmed him.
Wow, he absolutely saved lives that day, prevented it from being even worse.
No question. A genuine hero. He received awards, quite rightly. His actions were pivotal.
Okay, so let's shift focus to Barry Loukaitis himself. Why? Why does a 14-year-old do this? It's so complicated.
It really is. You can't just point to one thing. You've got to look at everything. His personal life, family situation, mental health, outside influences.
Like the media he consumed.
Yeah, that became a huge part of the story. But let's start with the motive he reportedly gave.
The bullying, specifically by Manny Vela.
Right. That was his claim. But again, the prosecution felt it wasn't the full picture. They thought there was more calculation involved.
Were there issues at home?
There were reports, yes. His mother apparently struggles significantly with depression, even suicidal thoughts.
Oh, wow. That must have deeply affected him.
You'd have to assume so. That kind of environment can create a lot of stress and instability for a young person. It's definitely part of the context here.
And his own mental state. The defense brought that up, didn't they?
They did. They argued he was suffering from clinical depression, maybe even delusions.
Delusions? Like what?
This idea of wanting to, quote, go out in a blaze of glory. Almost script he was following. They also mentioned he'd been diagnosed with hyperactivity, was on Ritalin.
So the defense painted a picture of someone not fully in control, maybe, impaired judgment.
Essentially, yes. That his mental condition severely impacted his ability to think rationally.
But the prosecution had a counter-argument.
They did. Their psychiatric experts testified that, in their view, Loukaitis understood right from wrong. That this wasn't a psychotic break, but premeditated, planned.
That's a huge difference in interpretation, and it has massive legal implications.
Absolutely. It goes to the core of culpability, especially for a juvenile.
Now, let's talk about those external influences. The violent media aspect really took off.
It did. And probably the most striking connection was to a book.
Stephen King's Rage, written under the pseudonym Richard Bachman.
Yes. And the plot. I mean, it's about a high school student who kills a teacher, takes his algebra class hostage. The parallels are just undeniable.
And Loukaitis allegedly quoted a line from it during the actual event.
This sure beats algebra, doesn't it? That was the reported quote. Chillingly direct.
King himself was deeply disturbed by this, wasn't he? Eventually pulled the book.
He did. He felt it might be acting as an accelerant, as he put it, for troubled kids. A really significant decision for an author.
And movies, too. The Duster Coat.
Yeah, reminiscent of The Look and the Quick and the Dead, a Western that had come out.
And other films.
Reports mentioned obsessions with natural-born killers, which is graphically violent, and The Basketball Diaries.
Basketball Diaries. Didn't that have a scene?
A notorious dream sequence where the protagonist, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, imagined shooting up his school class. Again, very disturbing echoes.
And music. Pearl Jam's Jeremy.
That was mentioned too. The song is about a bullied kid who commits suicide in front of his classmates. Themes of alienation, school violence, it all seemed to fit in this grim tapestry of influences.
So you have these potential influences combined with the access to his father's legally owned guns.
Right, the weapons were there. And the planning seemed meticulous. It wasn't impulsive.
It paints a very deliberate picture, doesn't it?
It does. Which leads us to the legal side. He was only 14.
But tried as an adult in Washington state. That was a big decision.
Huge. Trying minors as adults, especially for crimes this severe, is always controversial. It changes everything in terms of trial and sentencing.
He was convicted, right, in 97. He would have been 16 by then.
Yes, convicted on multiple very serious charges. 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, that's for Vela and Fritz. The aggravated part relates to the fact the murders happened during other felonies, like the assault and kidnapping and Mrs. Caires' death.
And Mrs. Caires?
Second-degree murder for her, plus first-degree attempted murder for Natalie Hintz, and 16 counts of first-degree kidnapping for holding the others hostage.
16 counts. Wow, the scale of it.
It really underscores the severity.
And the original sentence reflected that severity.
Absolutely. 2 consecutive life sentences, plus another 205 years, crucially without the possibility of parole.
So basically, locked away forever, that was the intent.
At that time, yes. Reflecting the tough-on-crime approach, even for juveniles in extreme cases.
But then the legal ground started to shift nationally.
It did. With the Supreme Court, the case Miller v. Alabama in 2012.
What did that ruling say?
Essentially, that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles violate the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment.
Why? What was the reasoning?
The court recognized that kids are different from adults. Their brains aren't fully developed, they have less impulse control, they're more vulnerable to peer pressure and negative influences. And, importantly, they have a greater capacity for change and rehabilitation.
So mandatory LWOP didn't allow for consideration of those factors.
Exactly. It treated every juvenile offender in those circumstances the same, regardless of individual background or potential for growth.
And that ruling became retroactive.
Yes, through another case, Montgomery v. Louisiana in 2016. That meant people already serving those sentences, like Loukaitis, had to be considered for resentencing. States, including Washington, had to create processes for this.
The Miller Fix laws.
Precisely.
So Loukaitis got a resentencing hearing. When was that?
April 2017. He was 36 years old by then, had spent over 2 decades incarcerated.
And the judge was?
Incredibly, it was the same judge who presided over his original trial, Michael Cooper, though he was retired by then.
That must have been quite something. The same judge, years later, applying these new legal standards.
It adds a layer of, well, continuity and perhaps perspective to the proceedings.
Did Loukaitis say anything? Show remorse?
He submitted a letter to the court expressing remorse, yes. And interestingly, he actually agreed with the state's proposed new sentence.
What was the new sentence?
A total of 189 years.
189 years, so still effectively a life sentence.
Pretty much, yes. While it's not technically life without parole anymore, meaning he could theoretically be considered for parole way down the line, a 189-year sentence starting at age 14. It's a de facto life sentence.
So the sentence changed on paper to comply with Miller, but the practical outcome?
Largely the same. He's unlikely ever to be released. It shows the tension between these evolving legal principles about juvenile justice and the sheer gravity of the crimes committed.
And the impact of that day, obviously never really goes away.
Never. For the families of Manny Vela, Leona Caires, Arnie Fritz, an unimaginable permanent loss.
For Natalie Hintz, living with those severe injuries and the trauma,
For all the other students who were held hostage who witnessed that terror, the psychological scars must be immense.
and for the whole community of Moses Lake, it shattered their sense of safety.
Absolutely. A deep trauma for the town.
And that debate around rage and media influence, it didn't go away either.
No, it remains a really difficult conversation. Where does artistic expression end and harmful influence begin? Especially with vulnerable individuals. King's decision highlights how seriously creators can take that potential connection.
Loukaitis' case, especially the resentencing, really puts a spotlight on how society grapples with juvenile crime, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. How do we balance accountability for horrific acts with the understanding that adolescents are still developing? What does justice look like? Our understanding keeps evolving.
And through it all, we have to remember Jon Lane's actions.
Yes. Amidst the tragedy, his courage stands out. A reminder of the human capacity for bravery and self-sacrifice.
So wrapping this up, we've looked at Barry Loukaitis, 14 years old, committing this terrible act of violence,
The deaths, the injuries, the terror.
and the complex web of possible factors. The alleged bullying, the difficult home life, the mental health issues, those powerful media influences.
And then the long legal journey. Tried as an adult, the initial life without parole sentence, and how landmark Supreme Court rulings forced a change, leading to the resentencing.
A resentencing to 189 years, still ensuring he likely spends the rest of his life in prison.
Yeah. This case forces us, really, to confront those hidden struggles some young people face and the tragic potential when things go horribly wrong.
We need to remember the names: Leona Caires, Manuel Vela Jr., Arnold Fritz Jr., remember Natalie Hintz's survival, and Jon Lane's heroism.
Definitely. And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about those complex influences, about how we prevent such things, and how justice continues to evolve, especially for young offenders.
A lot to reflect on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.